speaking tonight to start the conversation. The first is Brooke Bohannon from Wicked Good Produce. And Wicked Good Produce is Flathead Valley's online marketplace and distributor of fresh seasonal produce for household and wholesale ordering. I didn't write very much for you. And Dave Prather is here from Western Montana Growers Cooperative, which is a farmer-owned coalition of over 50 farms in and around the Bitterroot, Flathead, Jocko, and Mission Valleys, whose goal is providing markets in their region with fresh quality products from their farms. And they're each going to take just a couple minutes sharing about their experience of 2020 and how it impacted, if in any way, either their work, their business, or that of the folks that they bought from or sold to, and how that might be informing plans for 2021. Brooke, do you want to lead us off?
Sure. So I would say, you know, we're a small distribution business and farm ourselves. And going into March, most of the farmers that, and the restaurants mostly that we work with, you know, we had ideas of what we might need for 2020. And then by mid-March, with COVID happening, much like everyone experienced, things were shutting down. We had a shelter in place. So I kind of tried to wait till about April to reach out to some of our clients when, you know, most of them had no idea what we would be looking at for throughout the summer. So a lot of them just estimated needs based on the reduced seeding from the state. And at that time too, a lot of the farmers, rightfully so, were shifting because they already had their seed ordered and crops started and some things in the ground perhaps. So a lot of them shifted to more traditional CSAs. And then by June, when our governor lifted the 14-day quarantine and travelers started coming here locally, our restaurants were rather busy, almost as busy as last year. So we ended up having quite a busy year. And there were some things that we were short on and some things that we were able to meet demand, or lots of things we still were able to meet demand. And then going forward for next year, we'll just have to reevaluate with our farmers what they want to be able to supply for 2021. And, you know, hopefully 2021 will be similar to 2020, but we have no idea what's going to come with COVID.
Did you have any experiences with you know, a restaurant having, you know, placed an order and then having to shut down, and how did they handle that?
Oh yeah, well, that's right. That happened several times. Fortunately, not too many times did they already have their order in place for the farmers that hadn't closed, and then they might have to, we had several establishments closed for, you know, sometimes 2 days, sometimes 2 weeks. Often we just had to cancel that order, depending on, some of them didn't happen till fall, so they were storage crops, so I just brought them in here, kept them in our walk-ins or our storage facility, and then delivered them the next week. But there was a little bit of juggling like that, so I feel like this year required a lot of flexibility, both for our farmers and our chefs. You just had to be flexible.
And flexibility was both in variety and quantity, like just?
Yeah, and just like maybe 1 week as a farmer, you're anticipating X quantity of items to be ordered, and then a restaurant doesn't place that order because either their demand is low or they had to close. So, you know, then the farmer has to redirect, where am I going to take that product if it's ready for harvest right now? And the sale was supposed to go, but it didn't happen because of COVID. So they would have to be flexible and bring it to market or shift it into their shares. And then on the flip side, our clients had to be flexible that things weren't always going to be available because the farmers were making those shifts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you guys lost any restaurants yet up there?
Like closed permanently? Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Not yet. We have some that have closed for the winter because with the limited seating, it just wouldn't be functional for them or viable for them to be open. A lot of them still do grab and go plus limited seating, but only a couple have closed for the winter, but I assume they'll reopen in the spring.
Thanks.
And I guess one other thing that we did a little differently is that we offer a household online market that accesses all the farms that we collaborate with. And normally we don't run that during the normal farmers market season. And we kept that going this year as another avenue of people who wanted to, do curbside pickup and didn't want to have to go to the local farmers markets, then they could just keep ordering online. So that was something we did differently. Usually we just run that on the shoulder seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't home deliver to any individuals, they come do pickup. Do you have any farmers in your area that are doing delivery weekly?
Home deliveries, not that I'm aware of, no. We entertained the idea of that, but didn't do home deliveries.
I can't blame you.
We're waiting for that drone.
That's what we're waiting for. My understanding was that Xanterra didn't open restaurants in Glacier this summer. Do you know if that's an accurate understanding?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know. David, can you touch on that?
Yeah, they did grab and go only.
Uh-huh. I wondered if that maybe helped the restaurants, elsewhere.
Yes, particularly with the east side of the park being closed. I think that here in Whitefish, we saw a lot of tourism.
Yeah. Dave, do you want to share the world through your eyes?
Oh boy. Yeah, I'm happy to chat a little bit about our year. It's been chaotic, as it has been for everyone, I'm sure. Yeah, so, immediately for us back in March, the first thing that hit us was we had a enormous glut of eggs from a couple producers where market had slowed down over the winter, and the couple producers that we work with had increased production, and we were having a hard time keeping up and building a lot of inventory. And then, the first month of COVID was, not to put it lightly, but a blessing in disguise for that problem that we had. And that all of a sudden, everybody and anybody wanted to buy eggs, a bunch of stores that didn't usually carry them from us. They just needed eggs on the shelf. So that was a kind of a nice thing just to get that and help the producers out, but that didn't last very long until, it blew through all the inventory anyways. And then kind of the reality that we were in for a long haul set in. So, one thing that we started doing was we started doing a curbside pickup out of our warehouse, just as a kind of an outlet for producers because of the decrease in restaurant sales, decrease in farmers market. It was not that successful, but it was growing enough to where it was worth doing at any rate. And then we did stop doing it once our CSA season got going, just because we didn't feel like we had the staffing that we could make that work very well. We had a lot of staffing issues this year, both COVID related and not. And we probably will start doing the curbside thing again here soon, now that our CSA is done for the fall, because there has been some more inquiries about that, just as another outlet for individuals in Missoula, at least, for them to come and kind of buy larger quantities if people are still not that keen on doing in-person shopping or even doing curbside shopping at the stores. We saw a bump in CSA signups too, through April, May, as it became apparent that people weren't going to be having a normal summer. So that was a little helpful to, again, offset restaurant and farmers market sales for the growers. As Brooke mentioned, restaurants kind of through the summer, it was similar for us. They picked up, we obviously Xanterra, they never opened at all. So that was a big hit for us. And, but restaurants kind of got to a place where they were doing almost normal business, not quite, but with some of the supply chain disruptions that we saw in the spring, we had a few restaurants that were buying more proteins from us than they had in the past, which may have been none. So that was another thing we'll hope to build on kind of going forward, is just continuing to get more Montana proteins, Montana meats into as many restaurants as we can. And then let's see. Yeah, we had, issues. We haven't had any restaurants close. We did have some kind of ask for extended terms, which we were able to provide for a while for a few restaurants until they got their feet back underneath them. I think this winter is going to be really difficult for quite a few restaurants around the state, and I'm worried that there's going to be some that don't make it through just because of not being able to keep enough people in the door and not enough people ordering takeout, and the difficulties around that. So I'm a little worried that there'll be some account shrinkage, especially from a lot of the kinds of restaurants that support local foods. They're often working on even smaller margins than normal because they're willing to maybe spend a little bit more on their ingredients. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. Staffing wise was a disaster for us. We had just one thing after another this year with either COVID scares or people being close contacts, and just kind of a constant cycle of people being out, and we had to keep hiring all through the season. And then just stress levels were really high. All of our office staff are working pretty much entirely remotely. And then, people being home with their families and trying to work. And, that's not unusual, I don't think, for a lot of folks, but it just, it creates a lot of stresses that are hard to plan for. And we have been experiencing that and still are experiencing that at this point. But the other thing that we did this summer, and we're actually still doing it, were food boxes for, at first it was a USDA project. We were able to get a procurement contract with USDA that we did for a couple months, wherein we were essentially building small CSA type boxes that were going to food banks and other nonprofits who delivered them to end users, to families to use. It was just fresh produce at first. We did that for a couple months, and then we haven't been able to get another USDA contract, but Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center in Ronan, they were able to reallocate some of their some grant funds from a couple sources, and then they also came up with some money from a few other sources that we were able to continue that program, though on a slightly smaller scale. But for August and September, we were packing about 530 boxes a week. And then since then, and for the next, 2 weeks, we had about 2 more weeks on it. We've been doing about 330 boxes a week. And it's been pretty well received. The communities we've been working with to get those boxes to have been really pleased with just being able to have access to fresh produce. And then the last 5 weeks or so, we've had eggs and cheese in there as well. And then some turkeys the turkeys were not local, but they were supplied by MMFEC. They had funding for that, but the people receiving them have been just really kind about how it's benefited them. And it's been a big help for a lot of the growers too. There's a video, I think it's on YouTube. I could send a link here that MMFEC put together. Yeah, I'll I'll try to shoot that over here in a sec. But yeah, that was a pretty neat project. I don't know what's going to happen going forward. There was some company out of California that has a $35 million contract to supply some of the Montana food banks right now. So none of that food's local, of course. But we're, going to keep plugging away to at least try to get another contract. They changed up the program somewhat, but it's overall a pretty good deal, I think, even though there were a couple weeks where they told us we had to put some letters from the president in the boxes for them taking credit for the program. So that was not well received by most of the folks that were dealing with the boxes, but at any rate. But yeah, it's, chaotic year, but overall was, our with all the evidence being to the contrary, our P&L looks good for the year. The sales were good, just with retail sales being so strong. So we saw some growth, and hopeful we can kind of continue to build on that, just with being introduced to places that weren't as keen on buying local food, and hopefully we can continue those relationships kind of going forward.
Could each of you touch on your participation in the Montana Food Providers Project?
Yeah, well, we haven't done a whole lot directly. I was just involved in some of the phone calls, and then we started doing the food box program, which is, I guess, more or less directly related. I think there's going to be I think Arlie is going to be buying some food here pretty soon. And then Salish Cooney Tribes have a project over the next couple of weeks where they're going to be putting together essentially food box type items. So we'll, I think, be sending some produce to them for that. But yeah, I actually haven't been on many of those calls lately myself. We just lack of time and bandwidth on my part, but I feel like we've been trying to play a part as far as, having avenues to get to the local products for places that are able to bring them in.
Yep. Yeah. We've used Western Montana Growers Co-op for a number of projects. They may not actually know that,
Yeah.
but the project is using them for sure. Yeah. I don't even know if you're thinking 221 in terms of, do you think there'll be increased production for some of these new areas that you seem to be diving into?
Like the food box thing, I just have no clue what's going to happen there. And it makes planning really difficult. Like there's items now that we would normally have to sell into the winter that we're out of because we started using them for food boxes, and it, which is fine. The growers got paid for the product and it went out the door, but then other customers who normally buy them through the winter don't necessarily have access to them. But so that makes planning really difficult, just not knowing. We spend a lot of time planning with our customers over the winter to try to have a reasonable expectations for our producers. But so that's difficult to say. I do think, retail sales and all of that's just it's still continuing to grow somewhat. But it's, again, I think I'm worried about restaurants kind of going into the spring. I hope most of them can make it through until we get to some warm weather.
Mm-hmm. When you touched on COVID and staffing, I realized with our farmers, no one has actually specifically talked about, the impact of COVID and the distancing, and how did that impact distribution at the farmers market or curbside, or the tables, the gloves, the lines? I don't know. I'm just asking.
I don't know. I can't speak much to the markets, but we did kind of in partnership with CFAC in Missoula, you know, we started supplying hand sanitizer to a lot of the markets around the state. We bought a 270-gallon tote from Headframe Distillery in Butte, which that was kind of interesting to have sitting around. But and it, you know, made our warehouse smell like corn liquor for about a month. But that, you know, so I can't speak to the actual physical presence there, but we were just helping move that stuff around to various places, which was, I don't know, helpful, I guess, to some folks. But from a grower side, we had a few that either got COVID or had close contacts and had to kind of change up their production plans or they're just with lack of labor for, you know, a couple weeks here and there. And so that was an issue for sure.
Yeah.
I think a lot of farmers stressed CSA this year just because it was they're fixed numbers and it happens every week and it's dependable, whereas the restaurants seem to be up and down. Farmers markets were up and down. So it seemed like a good year where CSA really showed its strength in that you could plan on a set number, at least from a grower standpoint, you
know. When we did our curbside pickups, we definitely send specific instructions on how to approach what streets to come down, make one-way traffic, don't get out of their cars. You know, we bring it, they pop their trunk or we open up their side door, we're all masked up. They put it in there and do just online credit card sales. So that was something different before our curbside pickup was sort of just self-serve.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So did that mean more staffing or?
For our part of it.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, yeah. Am I coming through okay, Robin? You know, the bandwidth there is, is it okay? Yeah, okay. I'll keep talking. If not, I can call in on the phone too. But anyway, from the impact of COVID on Timeless, as far as the you know, the operations in Ulm, I mean, for our part, it was actually, you know, very significant. We spent, you know, our food safety person particularly spent a lot of time putting together, you know, policies and protocols. She still follows, you know, spends probably, you know, an hour or two, probably at least, I mean, maybe 3 or 4 hours a week still, you know, kind of following the CDC guidelines and, you know, and whatever other information she can glean. And we did all sorts of, you know, daily health screenings, right, for everybody. All the staff had to take their temperature coming in and and fill out a you know, a little survey about where they'd been and who they'd been in contact with and so forth. But you know, I think that probably the biggest impact for us, of course, everybody wears masks. There are two pieces that were probably, you know, the biggest impact, and that is the administrative staff. Some of them were, you know, 2 or 3, well, actually probably 2 months at home working remotely. And most of them hated that, you know, for sure. So some of the rest of us, you know, kind of swapped days at the plant. So there were fewer people in the, you know, in the office on any given day. But the biggest impact for us was the fact that we and we still restrict visitors. So like we have no visitors coming to the plant. And, you know, typically we have trade missions, we have people just driving by and stopping in, or, you know, whatever, you know, local groups or something that want to tour the plant and visit. And, you know, that's been kind of a real negative for us, to some degree on the sales side, but even more so just on the psychological side, you know, because we really enjoy giving tours and having that personal connection. And that's just been, you know, impossible, or at least we made it impossible. But we've had no COVID incidences from any of our staff, you know, since day one. So we're thankful for that. I guess the protocols are working.
I think what's interesting too is I think there's some positives that came out of COVID because it gave people an opportunity to do things different. It's like some farms stopped going to farmers market for health reasons, and then they found out, hey, I actually like not doing farmers markets. Maybe I'll stick to CSA. I know for us, when we hand out CSA, we used to unpack every single item out of every box into the customer's bag, which on a day when you had 140 shares to hand out, it's like so exhausting. And because of COVID, we pre-bagged everything and we just handed people, they came up, we handed them a pre-packed bag. It's not the personal touch, but man, it made like life was so much easier because of that. And COVID had given you the opportunity. So it makes me wonder, like, when COVID goes away, will it still have a legacy where we're still doing, we've found easier ways of doing things? Will we keep them, or will we go back to the way it was? You know, will CSA numbers drop off? Will people hold on to them? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
Could you say together in a broad, really broad brush, whether you anticipate shortages or surpluses with this boom bust thing that's going on? We just heard here, and I'm sure you heard it, that Southern California is shutting down for as many as 3 weeks. That has to affect our food stream somewhere. Do you think it's going to, that Montana can supply the food? Is there going to be a sourcing problem? Did you guys hear that? Okay.
I think that's a hard one to answer. Just, I mean, I think all of us are involved in more of such a micro level comparatively to national supply chains. But yeah, I mean, I suspect that, you know, distributors are still going to be running and farms, even shipping stuff out of California. I don't know all the details on that, but I'm guessing that's going to be getting out the door. You know, unlike meat packing plants where there's a lot of indoor work, you know, so much of produce is a field harvest and maybe a quick wash or something, but there's just less touching involved typically. There's obviously some items that have more processing, but I think a lot of that stuff's still going to be getting on the road is my guess. But yeah, I mean, you know, Montana certainly over the winter is not going to be supplying large amounts of produce to anyone. So the meat thing was interesting, I thought, over early, kind of late spring, early summer, where, you know, people were calling around to ask about, yeah, getting proteins just because so many of those supply lines got so disrupted. But I think that's calmed down quite a lot since then.
I haven't done a lot of reading on the California shutdown yet, but I can give a couple anecdotals where it sounds like a lot of the shutdown is really focused on just common folk. Like, you can't get your nails done or your hair done, and you can't sit outside at a restaurant anymore, and more that side of things. And I would assume that the production-oriented businesses that are essential have figured out kind of how to do it, and those aren't going to be as impacted. That would be my gut. And another crazy anecdotal, I have a really close friend who lives in San Diego, spends a lot of time going back and forth across the border. And she said she actually feels safer in Mexico because they don't have all these politics around masks down there. And so people are wearing masks, which I found kind of interesting, but that's total anecdote. No idea what the truth is there.
Hey, Dave, does University of Montana still buy, not a COVID question, but are they still buying as much as they were 5 or 10 years ago when it was kind of all new and in the news all the time? Have they kept with that, or have things changed?
It's been relatively stable. It certainly has not grown. You know, we started doing a couple items that we didn't do that long ago, you know, like Kalispell Creamery yogurt and that they use a fair amount of, but yeah, it's not been a growth area, that's for sure. But they still buy stuff and they still care and try, but they have all sorts of problems, the university itself.
Yeah.
I mean, I can just offer a quickie. I'm not as good as talking to Root Cellar Foods directly, but they pretty much fell off a cliff in the spring when MSU shut down. Sales just stopped. They didn't know what was going to happen and they were watching their budget. It did come back when they went back into school this summer, fall, but, and I haven't talked to her. She's just assuming there's a 2-month hole in her budget because they closed down at the end of Thanksgiving and won't be back, or before Thanksgiving, they won't be back until January. So that's what's on our end. Very crass, superficial look. I'm sorry, she's not on this call.
Yeah, she had family health, childcare issues last night and tonight. But anyways, Dave, when you say you have had all kinds of issues, were you thinking just generally, or is that COVID related, or just generally?
Oh no, just, you know, the things you've been seeing in the news for the last 6 years. Yeah, low enrollment and all sorts of administrative problems. Yeah, it's sad, but
Books by Krakauer.
That didn't help.
No.
But that's not the only problem, for sure.
It has been interesting through like the Arrow happy hours to it's like 5 years ago there were all these things happening, and it's interesting to hear what, like, whether it's Food Corps or Vista volunteers or Farm to School, which programs are still going, which ones have increased, which ones have kind of disappeared. Because you just kind of think that what you heard is still going on, but it's definitely a dynamic situation.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was wondering about the school. I mean, last night, Michael McCormick was on with Livingston Food Pantry. Seems like he's in like a growth stage, doing some really cool work down there. But I wondered what about the stuff that was really in the spotlight 5 years ago? Is that still ongoing?
Yeah, our school sales have done really poorly in that time, like public schools in general. Part of that is just lack of effort on our part, just because it's such a demanding market as far as the time commitment, and but a lot of it's, you know, just personnel changes because we're not, as it were, institutionalized in the purchasing programs with OPI and all those folks. But you know, if somebody who's a enthusiastic buyer moves on and they're no longer in a position, and the person next to them, they're coming in after them, just may not care as much about local and just go buy from wherever they're going to buy from.
Where do you think people can help stimulate or improve your business opportunities, both from producers and from distributors? I noticed some time that I've been going around to all the stores here in Helena, and I see the chain stores using this pandemic as a sort of a health thing. And I've seen produce like at Safeway vastly improved overnight, and they've got more than, you know, they're selling. I mean, so that must be competition, and there's an opportunity here. And I'm such a an advocate of local food and such an advocate of produce that it just drives me nuts that we're still getting so much of our product from Mexico and Southern California. So I'd like to get Arrow involved and stimulate anything we can do to use this as an opportunity to improve our market. And so what's the best way to keep in touch with you guys? You're so busy, but do you have a common website or a place where you can exchange issues so that people can help you or give you ideas, or they know somebody that needs something? Can you move on it, that kind of stuff? Or are you even equipped to do that? I know you just said you were doing it with curbside and CSAs and stuff, but if somebody came in with a high demand thing like schools, hospitals, whatever, could you sort of mobilize to do something with it, or would it just be something you wouldn't want?
It would take some, it couldn't, well, every situation is unique, but it would take crop planning. You would need to know in advance of what the demand would be in order to ask the farmers to grow it. You know, if it's not a huge amount, the supply might be available, but it just depends when you move into institutions like that, if the demand is there and having those relationships, the supply is there to meet the demand and having those relationships established.
Yeah, I do think the global food system is, people are used to thinking that there's always more product out there. It's just a matter of getting it from wherever. And when you start to do local food, you realize that there isn't never-ending products. You know, they're, like Brooke's saying, there's a lag time. If all the supply is accounted for and someone new comes in, that means you need new supply. And there's a lag time for production to catch up. Maybe Dave, maybe with Western Montana Growers Cooperative, where you have more farmers, works a little bit better, you know. Maybe there's more farmers with more supply. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. I mean, maybe there's a little bit more room there, but yeah, just like Brooke said, just depends on the situation and what exactly somebody's asking for. But
if you could get any number, 3 people together that could go visit John Tester at a time where you could get funds thrown at you for Montana cooperative base, would you go for it, or would you sort of want to stay pretty independent?
I mean, yeah, for ourselves, I mean, we don't do a lot of grant chasing. We will do some projects that are grant funded occasionally, but we're not opposed to it, I guess, for any reason, if, you know, especially if it's going to help producers. I mean, that's our mission, is helping growers find markets for their products. So anything that we can do to support that, that's.
Dave, I was going to ask, because I haven't been tracking, and I think it's still too early to say, but isn't there a Northwest co-op or food hub co-op in the works? What are your thoughts on how that might change things for you, if you have any at this point?
Yeah, I honestly don't know how well that's going to work, but I think we're going to do a little pilot project on it. So we, somebody, Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center, they had, the co-op development had put in for a grant, which was not funded through the new, it's like the local food promotion program grant with USDA, but there's a new version of that that's under the same umbrella for kind of food hub cooperation, as it were. And so us, Link Foods, Local Inland Northwest Co-op in Spokane, and the Puget Sound Food Hub outside of Seattle put in for that together. And I really don't know how well that's going to work, just given the distance involved. And Basically the idea of kind of trying to serve some larger institutional markets that aren't being served as well right now. And it's, it's limited here. I think there's more opportunity for that in Washington, perhaps. So it may be a way for them to bring some products from here to help serve some of their markets. But yeah, I have some doubts, but I think I'm hopeful for the cooperative aspect of it, and to see just how the communication aspect is going to work, and to see what we could do, even on a more micro level here to help solve some of those problems. But
hey, Dave, I think I ask you this question every time I talk to you, but when we talk about supply and demand, what's your assessment from the portions of the food system you deal with? Is there a shortage of supply, you think, a shortage of production that holds things back, or do you think it's more consumer driven? Are you finding there's a shortage of demand?
Yeah, a little of both. I mean, I don't know how many more bunches of green kale we're going to move in the summer time, but I think there's a lot of items that there's room on from a production standpoint, especially if and it's give and take, but either getting more customers that are willing to pay a little bit more for organic or organic equivalent local product, or reaching some economy of scale where growers have a little more room to access some of those markets that require a lower price point. I'm thinking things like institutions and hospitals, and even just some more chain grocery stores. But yeah, I think just crop by crop it's a little bit different. So some crops I would certainly say I don't anticipate a lot of room on, just knowing what I know from our producers and then other producers around the state. But that there's only a few months where that's really the case, and that shoulder season production still there's lots of room, I feel like.
Let's see my
Todd, I can guarantee you
go ahead, Dave.
Yep. Todd, I can guarantee you that there is no shortage for the grain crops, the pulse crops, peas, chickpeas, lentils, and the grain crops. East of the Rocky Mountains is actually a banner year of production, and there's actually significant surplus, I think, from from the processors and suppliers of organic products, at least from the east side.
So I'm just curious what you guys think about this. I've heard say, I can't remember where it's supposed to be coming into establishment somewhere, I think in our general on the west side, is one or more. I think they're they're indoor growing containers for greens and microgreens, and likely hydroponic under LED lights is my understanding. And I'm just curious, to hear comments on those, or and as a company that might be providing them probably through the winter, and may also continue to do that in the summer. I don't know, but I'm just curious, how you guys who work with dirt and live soil and all that, and try to honor that, just feel about access to that kind of those types of greens.
That needs to be a whole nother virtual happy hour. That's
okay. Okay, because
there's two sides of that coin. As a soil-based grower, there's certainly the side of us that thinks like, if we're worried about nutrition, soil-based is better. And so there's this issue we have with hydroponics especially now that they're allowed into certified organic, where hydroponics claim that they are equivalent to soil grown produce, yet they're unwilling to label their product as hydroponic because they want to keep that information from the consumer. So there's that side of this that I think gets farmers fired up. But then there's the flip side, which is there's no production in the winter in Montana. And so what's better, shipping stuff in from Yuma, Arizona, or having someone growing greens in a container in Whitefish, which is about to happen, keeping the money in the local economy? That's where, I don't know. That's the flip side of that coin, I guess. I feel like if they served an underserved part of the market, it's easier to stomach. If they come in the summer and are trying to outcompete soil-based farmers, then there's going to probably be more resentment. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Todd. There's a newer operation out of Hamilton we just started working with, and they're fairly sizable and they're very well funded. They're called Local Bounty with an I. I hate phonetic spellings. But their plan is to actually open several facilities kind of in the Northwest and Idaho, Washington, and maybe Utah too. But yeah, part of my strategy around them is just, I feel like, in the middle of winter, there's some benefits to having stuff grown closer by versus being so far away. At this point, they're not trying to certify organic, but I'm concerned about how that's going to look come summer, and trying to, one, work with them, but, with our own policies that we have, we're not going to displace sales from growers who work with, but then if customers start demanding certain things, or and just how that's going to look, that's my biggest concern, is displacing what is already happening.
I think another thing that can be frustrating is even government agencies are so caught up in innovation and technology. We want to fund innovation. So if you're a soil-based farmer who's doing good work and you just want to do more of what you're doing to get food in the schools, you can't get grant money. Yeah. But if you're willing to switch to container growing and LED lights and all that, then there's more funds available. So that's the side of it that's also frustrating.
Yeah.
Todd, when you're talking about, it's like you're looking at, how do you look at high tunnels and separate that from this high technology with LEDs and the expansion of technology? It seems like, we are increasing the growing season by just using high tunnels effectively and organically. Is there an organic solution that would work to stretch this through the winter? I know Nate Brown is getting close to it, and of course, Coleman wrote the book, but is there a future that we could actually beat the weather and expand food production through whatever, combining, trading, attaching, to attach that money in grants so that we get it where we want it? What's the difference between a high tower and a greenhouse?
Well, a high tunnel, you're growing in soil, native soil. Most of them you do have plastic, but most of them are passive solar. And you do get a lot of season extension, but in order to grow, at least in the flathead where we don't have as much sunshine, in order to grow in them from November to March, you would need supplemental heat and supplemental light. And I think if you're concerned about sustainability, it depends what your goals are. Some people don't want to grow with propane and LEDs, and so they just stop production. And I understand that means, well, if you're not going to produce, then somebody else is going to step in with produce from elsewhere. So I think that's a personal decision as a farmer. How much are they willing to, how much fossil fuel are they willing to put into their production, or are they just going to take the winter off?
Yeah.
And I think with high tunnels, you know, as an individual farm, we can grow enough. If you're looking at it from a food system standpoint, I mean, these are big questions. Like, can you feed everybody in Montana produce all winter using high tunnel production in Montana? I mean, that would be a large undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
Just to jump on what Todd was saying, on Thursday, December 10th, the Happy is a conversation with John Brown and Bob Quinn. And Bob Quinn is building a type of a subterranean greenhouse. You dig down about 4 feet below the ground level. And so you're growing 4 feet up. And that's, you create a geothermal heat exchange through pipes that you place below that subterranean greenhouse. And it's out of if you type in greenhouse in the snow, you'll see the model that he's basing his system on. But my point is that, so if with that type of a system, you can keep the soil from freezing, and the heat exchange from the piping below can keep the ground and ambient air warm enough for things like kale. You know, if you start the kale early enough in the fall so that it can get growing, because as Todd said, the second issue is light in Montana, and Bob is on the east side, so if there's any light, he's getting it. But in Nebraska, they can get 100 more days of sunlight than we can here in the Flathead Valley. It's, you know, it's hard to fathom that. But the big issue, so there are two pieces that limit our capacity to grow indoors here without adding extra costs for heat or light.
Yeah, and that's even the case on the east side. You know, when I moved back to the farm in the 70s, it was in the 80s, I guess, I built an earth sheltered, you know, passive solar designed greenhouse. Wasn't subterranean, but you know, what I found, you know, definitely, and I was supplying tomatoes and cucumbers to local restaurants, but boy, beginning Thanksgiving, you just could not push the blossoms and get the seed set and everything that you needed. So, you know, I think you're spot on, Todd. You know, from November through March, even on the east side, you know, it's going to require supplemental light. You know, and I'm guessing probably even for the kale, as far as, you know, for you know, commercial type of production, right? I mean, you know, for your own home use is one thing. If production goes down 50%, you just plant more kale the next year. But for commercial operations, light's an issue, east side or west side. The advantage is now that, you know, there's LED, whereas 30 years ago,
right,
you know, we didn't have LED lighting
that's
technology.
what I was thinking. With the quick advance of microtechnology and solar was the same thing. Other people said, no, that isn't the reason we don't have solar now. It's a lot more than that. So I'm looking at, you know, high-tech stuff that we could learn that would be applicable to our conditions, like the future of LED and of course, alternative energy working together. So I guess that's off the table right now, because we got all we can do just to deal with today's problems. But sure would be nice if we got a lot of research going in that direction at the university, as far as I'm concerned. And
I think you're right. I think you have to pick your problem that you're working on. I think high tunnels are extremely useful to farmers who are trying to just run a financially sustainable farm. It stretches their season, it increases quality. So if your goal is to have more farmers and then make sure they can make a living, high tunnels are very attractive. If your goal is to serve Montanans Montana grown food all year round, that's a whole deeper, bigger issue. And sometimes I think you just have to, as a farmer, you're picking your bat. You can't get buried in all the issues. You just gotta, like, financial survival comes first. Mm-hmm. Trying to get more farmers to think that it's feasible to be a farmer is important, you know. So you use what you have to achieve that goal, and hope down the road, you know, you're dealing with some of the bigger issues. You know, if you have to buy from out of state 3 months of the year, that's great compared to buying out of state 12 months a year, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's a progression.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of a crazy, simplistic question, but there's a lot of you who work on farms are farmers, and I'm curious, Brooke, Todd, Tom, what has your perspective on what the barriers to a financially viable mixed vegetable farm, has your perception of what makes it viable changed over the span of your time in farming?
I think in the vegetable world, definitely. When we first started farming, Elliot Coleman was the guru. And he was telling everybody, you can gross $10,000 to $20,000 an acre, so the bigger your farm, the better. And I would say in the last 5 years, you have this entire no-till organic revolution taking place on small farms where people like J.M. Fortier and Connor Crickmore are showing that you can make you can gross $145,000 on an acre and a half just by doing bio-intensive production. You don't need a tractor. You don't need 40 acres. You know, you can make a living on 1 acre. I think that is revolutionary in terms of attracting young people and making farming seem achievable, much more so than the idea that you needed 20 acres and lots of equipment. So I think in that light, I think it's been a great change in the past 10 years. But either way, I think convincing young people that farming is a good choice of a career is still an uphill battle, you know, given how disconnected, you know, everybody's looking at their phone. It's all seems to be technology. Everybody's interested in technology. So I think we have our work cut out for us, maybe. Brooke, Tom?
I would agree with what you say, Todd, or what you said. You know, we only farm, we have 2 parts of our business, but we only farm 1.5 acres, you know, and we lease that land. We don't even own our land because the price of property here in the Flathead is so high. So that's a big, I think that's everywhere that land cost is difficult for entry. And then having a population basis that can support your farming endeavor too is important. But having this idea of a much smaller scale farm, it is intensive farming, but that should be more attractive to younger people, hopefully.
And we're just a small scale cattle operation mostly. And I guess honestly, there is a shift with some more, and we're 100% grass fed. And so that's some of the shift we've seen is probably a little more interest in that. Makes it a little more realistic for a small cattle operation to function, to be realistic.
Thanks.
I'm just going to ask a question. I have no idea if you can answer it, and I've heard, you know, in the Flathead that most of what we're a tourist destination area, and a substantial amount of our local farmers' produce, you know, a proportion of it goes to those restaurants. And I'm curious if does anybody know the percentage that actually is directed to locals, and, you know, just trying to understand in terms of, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm thinking of your comment, Brooke, about having a population that's big enough to support your production, and just wondering what those demographics are for farmers in areas that don't have a destination, a tourist destination population access. There's a question in there somewhere. Hopefully somebody can tease it out.
I think, are you asking here in the Flathead, like based on the percentage of produce, we're just talking vegetables, grown, what percentage of that goes like direct to homes versus into wholesale, like restaurants and things like that, that then therefore serving a mixture? We don't know if the people eating there are tourists or locals. Is that your question?
I think my question is, do you think we have a big enough, I think, here's what I think it is. Do you think we have a big enough population here in the Flathead if we were not a tourist destination? Like, does that, how do we know what that impact is that allows our farmers to?
I would, Todd, you can comment on it too, but I would say currently in the Flathead, most of our farmers are selling to people who live here. This is their home.
That's great.
I would say that the amount going out to, because we're, you know, have this robust tourism, is a small fraction of their farm income and sales.
But I would add that what percentage of food eaten in the Flathead is grown by Flathead growers? It's tiny, 1%. I mean, so there's huge room, but that part is consumer driven, I think. There's also the I was at a talk with a bunch of grain growers this spring, and it was very interesting. They mentioned that the Flathead is not a big grain growing area, but even so, the farmers that grow wheat in the Flathead grow enough wheat to feed all of Montana for a year just in our valley. And so I asked them, well, that's amazing. So how much of the grain used in the Flathead do you sell? And they said, well, 0, we export it all. And I was like, oh, well, okay. So you grow enough to feed us all, but yet you skip over that market because you're tied into the commodity export. So again, I think sometimes we just have to look at things differently. Like why not fill the local market first and then export the rest? And again, getting consumers, you know, to buy local as much as they can. And yeah, sure, they're gonna have to buy non-local food, but.
Todd, isn't that kind of one of those chicken and egg things? You know, you need to have the mills that we no longer have to process that grain, and you know, how do we get those back?
Yeah, this, you know,
definitely.
It's not only the mills, because most people don't eat flour. You know, most people, you know, I mean, restaurants, so forth. It's like, okay, they buy the flour, but what people eat is bread, is pancakes. You know, is biscuits, is cupcakes. So it's like you need that next step as well. You know, vast majority of food that's eaten is, you know, it's kind of processed to some degree or other. So you're totally right, Mark. You know, there's a whole infrastructure between what happens on the farm and, you know, and what ends up on the table, right? I mean, just infrastructure to clean, right? I mean, that's the first step. You know, that's only the first of about 3 or 4 steps to actually get food to the table.
I think that the consumer, and we have to agree, I mean, we have to come to terms that there's got to be a battle somewhere. There has to be some not soft put, but hard push, like was evident in our time in the 60s to a degree, but the industrial food complex, as we all know, spent billions and billions and billions, and they're spending more on advertising right now than they are on food. American public is thoroughly brainwashed, and people don't know from Adam. Yet we have all these discussions, and when people say, oh yeah, farmers market, they zip down there, boy, and they load up on their vegetables, but it's not in the culture. We've lost it. We've traded our culture for consumerism. We've traded our culture for everything made in the factory and everything top down. And now we're trading our culture for globalization and everything made out of the country. So where are we going to stop? You know, when do we put our heels in the ground and say, okay, we can build a flour mill here, you know, or maybe we can, I mean, it may sound silly, but we could at least try something, you know, that would be motivated and promoted and advertised as really local people doing local food. And there is a local towns and local people movement going across the country. So it's more out east, but we're catching on here. And so I think we need to keep it going. I mean, at the same time, we need to see that everybody out there is employed and not breaking down, that they're making a living. We have to do that first. So, but anyway, I mean, I'm very excited about turning around and doing something I hate doing, is working with local land use, just because I think it has to be done. We have to have farmland and we have to have young farmers. So I absolutely hate zoning meetings after years and years of consulting, but somehow we have to do it. So there you go.
Are you familiar with CFAC, Ken?
No, a little, yeah. But
they're out of Missoula, and you might want to connect
with
them.
Yeah. I would like to have Helena try to, I don't know, we seem to be separate communities around the state, and you don't, you know, it's like you live in Helena, so you're a Helena person. I would like Helena to be looking at Missoula all the time. Of course, they do have the university up there, you know, but I think Missoula is really making the progress in the state in land use.
Yeah, they just might have some resources to support you in your Helena.
There you go.
Well, that's good. I'm just reading your comment here, Mark. The gluten-free oatmeal. Yes. Well, I do want to check it. Oh my gosh, it's 6:42. I'm supposed to check in at 6:30. So at 6:42, our session's supposed to go to 6:15. So I'm happy to stay on. I usually stay on till 7 and we can continue the conversation. And I do want to create a space for people to gracefully leave if they feel complete. So don't feel you have to stay on just because some folks are wanting to continue the conversation. Good. All right. Take care. Yeah. Oh. Well, we're all doing the best we can.
Yeah, seems like the same conclusion. You know, it's their big issues, and where do you start other than where you're at.
Yeah, that piece about the flour, turning that flour to the bread, is like that speaks to that conversation earlier about the value added has to be higher. I guess the flour is too cheap.
Well, and it's like, how do you get more? What Ken was saying, how do you get more people to shun globalization and processed food? You know, many people have lost the knowledge of how to even cook. And so I think I'm coming to terms with the idea that, like, okay, maybe organic, local, regional production, yeah, it has to become more accessible. And it has to become, even though convenience is a 4-letter word, you know, it's like, maybe we can make local, organic, accessible, and convenient. And maybe we even have to, instead of selling people raw materials, we have to find ways to add value. Or I think that's why the restaurant industry is attractive, because then people are eating a meal and they're, oh, wow, this is what it tastes like. Maybe I'll go back home and I'll try to cook this. I think we're learning. I think we're trying to figure out where's the best place to engage without being like stubborn. You don't want to be too stubborn. You know, it's easy to criticize globalism for easy and convenient, but like if that's what the customer wants,
yeah,
you might have to give it to them, because
Yeah.
if you're not willing to give it to them, they're going to pass you by. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, in the end, it's market driven. I mean, that's just the reality. So, you know, we need to change the market. You know, when transformation, if transformation needs to take place, it needs to take place at the market level, right? It's like to change consumers to be not consumers, to be food citizens, right? Mm-hmm. To buy for more than just food on the plate, to buy for the local farmers, to buy for the local economy, to buy, you know, in ways that support the local community. So it's a big job.
I think we have to be creative in how we think about it. It's almost like you need a psychologist to come in and tell you, like, how do you tap into the average consumer and get them, you know, you have to think outside our normal box.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so Grow Montana is doing a local food impact survey. This is a survey, not a survey, a study that was commissioned by CFAC, I think, and Grow Montana years ago, but they couldn't get the funding for it. And Grow Montana just got the funding from Headwaters this spring. And it's going to be a 14-month study to look at the impact of local food, you know, on Montana from lots of different perspectives. And one part of it that we're trying to tease out, how do we do it successfully and effectively, is this question of what is it that drives people's choices to buy food, not at the farmer's market, because that seems to be pretty clear, right, but at the grocery store.
Yes, that's great. And Robin, I'm sure you're familiar with the impact studies that Ken Meter has done in various regions in Montana over the last 4 or 5 years, right?
Yes.
And he doesn't talk about the psychological aspect of it, but you know, the monetary impact that could make, and it's absolutely eye-opening. You know,
do you have?
And the next question is exactly what Todd is addressing. Is, you know, like, well, okay, we need. It's clear we need to change how people eat, but the next question is, well, how do you do that? You know, for sure. So,
I mean, it's funny how they all work together, because last night, Michael McCormick, we were talking, and it's like, we all know how local foods can benefit Montana's health and economy and rural communities. We know that link. And it's kind of crazy and counterintuitive that Michael McCormick is showing how to make it work from a food pantry. He's putting all the pieces together and vertically integrating this operation and showing us, and yet wealthy communities that have lots of for-profit businesses can't seem to like link the pieces together. And so it's like, you know, it fascinates me. You know, how do you get the momentum and all the pieces to fall into place? Because we know that there's a benefit there, and we know it would be successful, yet we can't seem to get over the hump.
Right. Right. Are we asking the wrong question?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Dave, do you have easy access to those reports from Ken Meter? I've asked for it from Jan and Pam Garway, and you know, it may come my way eventually, but his name has come up quite frequently in the last 2 years.
Okay. Yeah. And you know, Ken was a consultant, or you know, was the lead on numerous projects in Montana, cover the whole state. I know one, you know, in our multi-county area up here was funded by Montana Farmers Union.
Okay.
And they would absolutely have it. As far as the other ones, I'm not sure where the funding came from or kind of who's the owner of it. But
Okay.
Ken could definitely point you in that, in that direction. I'm trying to remember the name of his, yeah, Clearwater Consultants or something like that, perhaps.
Okay.
In Minnesota. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I thought he was, is his outfit Headwaters Consulting out of like Wisconsin or Michigan or somewhere in the Midwest?
Minnesota, right. He's centered in Minnesota, and that's possibly, I'm sure I have, numerous emails that if I haven't deleted them, I can come up with his email. I'll send it to you, Robin.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. I know the Farmers Union would be happy to collaborate. Their info, so, yep.
Perfect. All right.
Well,
shall we call it an evening?
Yeah, we should. It was a great evening.
It was.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. Yeah.
Great.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for your contributions, Todd. It was great.
Yep. Nice to talk to you, David. Thanks, Robin.
Have a great night, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.